right, welcome back. We are still talking about social policy in Chapter 18, and a couple of things to review. One, to know, that the poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer. Essentially, the wealth that is controlled by the top percentage of income earners is increasing, and the wealth that is controlled by the lower income earners is decreasing. Another thing to consider is that poverty counts a lot of times really can be wrong or incorrect because some families, some people fluctuate. They go in and out of poverty throughout the course of the year. So, for example, if you consider seasonal work, people that can, only get jobs during like Christmas time, when more workers are hired to help deal with the amount of crowds or customers that are coming in. Another thing to consider is, when you're talking about taxes, that the rich really do send in more money in taxes to the federal government. So really, when the federal government is collecting their revenue around tax time, most of that money is coming from the rich. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. And we can look at unemployment insurance. Unemployment insurance is something that unemployment benefits are regulated by the states and subsidized by the federal government. But if you're to look at this map, this is a wonderful map to look at. And it tells you how unemployment insurance benefits vary from state to state. The map classifies the 50 states according to the maximum weekly benefit. You collect unemployment benefits every week that they offered their unemployed workers as of June of 2009. In many states, the maximum benefit can only be obtained if the unemployed worker has dependents, such as children. And that, again, varies from state to state. Okay. This chart is probably the most important chart in this PowerPoint. It talks about all of the social welfare programs that exist that are funded by the federal government or regulated by the state or both. It lists your entitlement programs, which is Social Security. Medicare is actually broken up into 4 parts: Part A, Part B, Part C, and Part D. We are only concerned about Parts A and B because that's what gets used the most. There's unemployment insurance, which is an entitlement, can be. And then your means-tested programs, which are Medicaid, food stamps, TANF, Social Security insurance, which is different than Social Security. And then there's the children's health insurance programs, or CHIPS, which are regulated by the states. And so what we're going to do next is we're going to go into each program and we're going to talk about each one so you can get a better understanding of this. You'll also have more of a description of each policy, who the beneficiaries are, and what the funding is for each program when you do your research project. All right, the first one to look at is Social Security. The Social Security Act of 1935, not 1965 for those of you who have gotten that incorrect. The Social Security Act was created in the 30s, as well as another program called Aid to Families with Dependent Children. That will be replaced. Aid to Families with Dependent Children is a welfare program that it has been replaced, and we'll get into that more in detail. Okay. In the 1960s, President Lyndon B. Johnson actually decides to be that president that decides to declare a war on poverty. It increases the number of social welfare programs and policies that the federal government chooses to fund. In the 80s, President Reagan declared a war on anti-poverty programs and persuaded Congress to cut welfare benefits and lower the number of Americans on welfare. That can be looked at from a lot of different perspectives and with a lot of different reasoning behind it. And really how you choose to view Ronald Reagan's actions in the 80s really has a lot more to do with your political ideology and whether you fall left of the center and you're liberal or more right of the center and you're a conservative than anything else. All right, so the first one, we're going to look at temporary assistance for needy families. This is a welfare reform policy that was created to essentially give a temporary, not permanent, but temporary assistance for families that fell below the poverty line. TANF is the one to look at and the one to remember. TANF replaced aid to families with dependent children when you start looking at President Johnson and his administration. Okay. TANF requires people on welfare to find work in 2 years, and there is a lifetime maximum for withdrawing on TANF of 5 years. Once you hit 5 years of being on temporary aid to needy families, you can no longer claim it. It's the same with unemployment benefits. There is a cap, there is a limitation through your lifetime. And once you hit that maximum, you can't take any more money out. Welfare is one of those ideas or concepts that we view welfare either in a negative light or a positive light. A lot of times there's very little middle ground to be found between the two political ideologies on the spectrum. Liberals tend to see that help from the government, aid from the government to help those in need that cannot help themselves because circumstances are beyond their control. Conservatives like to see fewer and fewer welfare programs and more of those programs cut for a lot of different reasons. Political ideology is a tricky and slippery slope. You cannot always generalize when it comes to social welfare programs. The last slide that we're going to look at is this diagram that shows how welfare reform has drastically reduced the welfare rolls. This is something to consider, that if you look at the percentage of the population on welfare throughout the years, you can look at this and make a lot of different generalizations. You could say, looking at this chart, there are fewer people on welfare than there once were, so people are getting jobs and the economy is doing better. Or you can look at this chart and say, wow, welfare programs have been cut, and so fewer people are able to benefit. Or you can make another generalization without all the facts and say, oh, look it, there are fewer and fewer percentage of the people on welfare because the population has shot up so high. There's a lot of different generalizations you can make, and there is some merit to all of them, but you have to have all the facts to be able to make that conclusion. Presidential administrations and their goals have a lot to play into that. Political parties and policymakers have a lot to do with this. So just some information to consider. We're going to end this episode, and when we come back, we will talk about Social Security, how it is a broken system, and it really is just continuing to be a Band-Aid on a gushing wound. And because society has changed and the program has not, that program could potentially bankrupt itself if it doesn't change soon. All right, have a good evening.